Great. We'll get started here in about 30 seconds. Grab a pen and paper, grab a beverage, and we'll get started here in just a second. Fantastic. Well, thanks everyone for being here today. We are going to be diving into everything Microsoft 365 today and really how it can be your ecosystem to have everything in one place. So this webinar is going to be going through a bunch of stuff. And before we go into the agenda, a little bit about us. I'm with Northwest Technologies Group. We're an IT provider. We help organizations never spend money on technology without a measurable business outcome. So really help organizations align their technology with either reducing risk, increasing revenue, or reducing cost. I'm the director of marketing. We have a whole archive of other webinars at nwtx.com/webinars. So check that out. We have webinars on cybersecurity, password management, all sorts of different topics relating to how can small businesses manage their technology better to drive better outcomes for their organization. So we got a full agenda today. As Microsoft 365 environment has expanded and us in organizations utilizing it, our agenda is also expanded. This is the second or third time we've actually done this webinar in the past year. And it's constantly evolving as more information is coming out and new tools are coming out. But big picture, we're going to be going through some benefits of Microsoft 365. We're going to be going through a comparison of Microsoft 365 and Google Workspaces. We're going to be talking about the world of Microsoft, kind of what's changing from a license standpoint and also terminology and things like that. We'll be doing a deep dive into SharePoint, OneDrive, Microsoft Teams, how to better secure your Microsoft environment, and then also wrap it up with the future of Microsoft 365 and what can we look forward to when it comes to solutions from them. And then last but not least, we'll have a Q&A session towards the end. And in these webinars, we have tons of awesome questions. You've all submitted, a couple hundred of you that registered for this event have submitted questions in advance. So thank you. We've been able to curate this event for your specific questions. But as they come up, use the little Q&A button in the bottom of your screen, the middle of your screen, submit questions in the Q&A section. That way we make sure we answer them. And then through the event, and we'll dedicate some time towards the end to answer those questions. So let's jump right into the content. So first, let's talk about why Microsoft Cloud and what are some of the advantages of it. So this is really discussing if you're currently using an on-premise server or if you're using on-premise technology like workstations or a server to store your files. We're going to be kind of talking about the comparison, and there's a lot of misnomers around the cloud and especially the Microsoft 365 cloud. So I kind of want to debunk some of those misnomers, but then also just talk about the benefits of it. And if you are kind of weighing, should I have a server or should I have information in the cloud? What's the differences? What are the benefits? The first one is really around here is as far as 80% of Fortune 500 companies are using the Microsoft Cloud. So this should give you some confidence that, especially as a small business, if enterprise organizations are using the Microsoft Cloud, whether it's Azure for hosting servers or OneDrive and SharePoint for storing files, or Outlook for emails, or Teams for team collaboration, you should have the confidence that a lot of Fortune 500 companies, the majority of them are using the Microsoft Cloud, and they've put their security in it. Ultimately, nothing's 100%, right? There's no system out there that, and actually our president and CEO of our company always jokes about this, and I'll probably get this joke wrong, but basically, at the end of the day, the most secure tool is the one that you don't use because ultimately any tool you use has some sort of security risk element to it. So it's all evaluating what risks are better than others. And for corporations, they've determined that having on-premise servers and things like that is more risky, more costly than having it in the cloud. Kind of in conjunction with that is the cloud helps improve security, enables compliance. So let's talk about improved security for a second. I know it feels great to have all your stuff locally, right? It feels great to have a hard drive in your office or a server in your office that you see every day. You know the keys to get into the building. But ultimately, especially from a small business standpoint, having all of your stuff locally and trying to manage that, because it's not just local, right? If your server or workstations are connected to the internet, anyone in the world has access to them. So from a security standpoint, having things locally is ultimately so much harder to manage from a security standpoint, especially if you're a small to medium-sized business. A lot of large corporations still have on-premise servers or workstations, but and they spend millions of dollars securing those on-premise servers. If you're a small or medium-sized business, you don't have those resources to have enterprise level security in place to secure your servers or workstations. So ultimately, the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, IBM are investing into security. Obviously, nothing's perfect, right? Like I mentioned, but they're going to have more things in place than you are from a local standpoint. And you can do all the things like VPNs and stuff like that to connect to a local server. And that's great. There's a lot of things you can do to connect to a local server. And if you need to have an on-premise server, there's great reason for that. But as we found with a lot of our clients, so 90% of our clients are within the 20 to 100 employee range. They're in that small business. We have a couple larger clients and a couple smaller clients that are smaller than that. And 90% of them don't need servers. And if they do need a server, you can actually put that server in the cloud. And there's a ton of cool features out there. Windows Virtual Desktop, which is now Azure Virtual Desktop, has come out where you can actually virtualize all your computers and have everything in the cloud. You don't even need to have anything locally stored locally, or just having your servers in the cloud. So if you need to host QuickBooks, or you need to host your practice management software, or you need to host your electronic management software, record software, and on a server, you can still actually host that in the cloud. So today, we're not going to dive deep into servers necessarily in regards to like Azure or hosting your server in the cloud. We will be talking about hosting files in the cloud and emails in the cloud, and we'll talk about best practices and things around that when it comes to OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams and Outlook. But big picture, if you're evaluating servers versus the cloud, there's very few reasons to have everything, and they're becoming fewer and fewer to have things locally than having in the cloud. It's more cost effective. And at kind of our next point here, enable compliance, especially if you're in a regulated organization, medical, financial, legal, even marketing firms that deal with a lot of data. Having things locally is a compliance nightmare because you have to document it. Not only do you have to secure everything, but now you have to demonstrate that you're doing everything and having everything super secure. Whereas if it's in the cloud, Microsoft and any of the cloud providers have a lot more capabilities of demonstrating compliance when it comes to security. So number third here is it helps you reduce costs. So I know if you're evaluating Microsoft 365 or some sort of subscription model of licensing for file storage or email, first of all, number one, if you're paying for Microsoft 365, you're already paying for file storage. Every Microsoft user gets a terabyte of data for a OneDrive storage. So, and that's for any of the business licenses, so E3, E4, E5, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well about the different licenses. But you automatically get a ton of free storage. So if you're talking about file storage, you can get rid of, if you're using a server for file storage, there's no reason to have your files locally when you can host them in the cloud for way cheaper than trying to have that server there, right, to store your files. And then also there's a ton of security features that we'll talk about later as far as sharing files with your clients or your vendors that we'll talk about when it comes to OneDrive. So reduce costs. So not only can you get rid of that server, right? Because you're probably already paying for a subscription to store your files in the cloud in OneDrive or SharePoint, but then also the cost of managing it. We're IT providers. We help our clients manage their technology, and the most costly pain to manage is servers. They're the most complex form of technology that a small business has in their environment, generally speaking. So to manage them is very costly. Not only do you have the huge upfront cost of $5,000 to $10,000 to buy a server, but the ongoing maintenance and the disruption and the point of failure, right? Which kind of goes into our next point here. The cloud helps you simplify IT management. You have a huge point of failure if you're utilizing on-premise servers, right? If you have everything stored locally, if the internet sputters, if you have a power outage, if you have a fire or a break-in, any sort of disruption to that server, your entire infrastructure goes down, right? And you lose that productivity. So ultimately, it simplifies it, right? Everything in the cloud, Microsoft and Google and AWS and all the cloud providers, IBM Cloud, all promise that they double, triple redundancy your data. That way, if they were to have a breach or a crash in one area, your data is somewhere else as well. So simplifies it for your IT provider, right? Whether that's internal or external, it simplifies it and ultimately just makes your team more productive because you don't have that point of failure as well. The cloud promotes agility and keeps you current. So having a server, you have to patch it, you have to update it, you have to replace it every 5 to 6 years. Whereas the cloud, you can scale. So if you want to open up another location, you want to open up a second location in another state, you can easily add or remove subscriptions and add a new server or new Microsoft subscription. So there's tons of benefits. Once again, we're finding if you're a small business, right? If you're under 250 employees, 9 times out of 10, getting rid of your server and moving everything to the cloud has a tremendous amount of benefits from cost savings, security, simplicity, agility. And there's very few reasons to have an on-premise server. And even if you still need a server, there's ways to put your server in the cloud that's more cost-effective, that's more stable, and more secure and compliance appropriate as well. So awesome. Let's jump into our next section, which is going to be really around Microsoft versus Google Workspace. So here's a couple things that are some advantages to Microsoft 365 versus Google Workspace. So Google Workspace is their third or fourth name change in the past 10 years. It used to be G Suite. It used to be Google Apps. So now it's Google Workspace. And basically, it's their suite of Gmail, Google Drive, Google Docs, Sheets, and presentations. And it's all their suites. And so honestly, we get this question a lot. We are definitely agnostic. If you are a client that, is using Google and you want to use Google and you're doubled down on Google products, that's great. We still probably have 20% of our clients use Google and we're the 80% use Microsoft 365. So there is some industries that it's, using Microsoft 365 or using Google is great. Honestly, as a side note, I love Gmail. Gmail is the best email provider out there, hands down. Google gets search, right? They're all about search. So searching emails, searching documents, they have a super powerful tools when it comes to that regard. But if you're an organization that, especially if you're in a highly regulated organization where security is super important, medical, financial, legal, tax preparers, or CPAs, marketing firms that deal with a lot of data, or any sort of technology provider like us, security is a paramount concern for your organization, and you are targeted more than other organizations just based upon how much data and how much PII, which is an industry term called personal identifiable information, your organization holds. So security is a primary importance to you, and Microsoft 365 just seems to always be a couple steps ahead of Google Workspace and Google products when it comes to security and just the amount of security you can put in place. You can really lock things down and have just multiple levels of security, especially when it comes to file storage and file sharing, which we'll talk about in a little bit. They just really have a ton of features. Google is constantly, trying to keep up, but Microsoft seems to always can be one step ahead. And that's why, like I mentioned earlier, 80% of the enterprise Fortune 500 companies use Microsoft. They're not using Google. And the reason for that is primarily around security and compliance and things like that. Another great reason to use Microsoft 365 over Google is Microsoft Teams. So Microsoft Teams is a new relatively new team collaboration platform that's come out in the past 5 years. And if you're a Google user, you're probably going to be using Slack. And we used Slack before. So go back 2.5 years ago, we were a Google Slack organization where we use Google products in conjunction with Slack. That's a great setup. That works for a lot of companies, especially for the non-highly regulated industries, or just have really simplistic needs. But ultimately, you're using two different products, right? And you have to pay for Slack and pay for Google, and they're not the same company, so you're going to have some integration issues and things like that. So Teams, if anything, Teams has just been a phenomenal tool, and in the past 1.5 years, they've had, I think they said, about 10 years of innovation in the Teams product because of the pandemic, because of globalization, because of working remotely. There's been a exponential increase in usage, and also they've invested so much into Teams platform. It's only getting better and better. We'll talk a little bit more about that later as far as all the different changes and things like that and cool features that are coming out. Another thing, Microsoft 365 is compliance. Demonstrating compliance is way easier than in Google. The big downside, like I kind of hinted at, is there's not as user-friendly. So Microsoft 365 is really not as user-friendly as Google Workspace products like Gmail. And Google is very simplistic. It's similar to like Apple products where it's just extremely user-friendly. Whereas Microsoft, they don't always make things super user-friendly, and they really rely on Microsoft resellers and partners like us to help clients set up, train, and manage their Microsoft 365 environment. As if you've ever called Microsoft support, it's not the greatest in the world. It's hard to get somebody to actually help you solve the problem. And there's so much Microsoft can do, right? That's the thing. The more they promise, right, the more they can deliver, the more that, there's also the more the hassle of implementing it and setting it up. So if you are using Microsoft and you're doubled down on that, or if you're thinking about utilizing it, get a Microsoft partner or reseller. Trying to do it on your own, even just trying to figure out the licenses, which is our next slide, which we'll talk about in a second, is sometimes a pain. So let's talk about licenses. So the world of Microsoft 365 has changed a little bit. They're moving over from Office 365 to Microsoft 365, as you can kind of see here. And they're adding more subscriptions. And I'm not going to dive deep into all the differences, but they have a lot of options. And the reason why they're switching names from Office 365 to Microsoft 365 is the benefits of being able to be kind of involved in your entire technology infrastructure. So they're going to help you with endpoint management. They're going to help you with a bunch of other stuff, which we'll talk about later. But it's not just Office products, right? Traditionally, it's not just Word and Excel and PowerPoint. They're kind of getting into all these other technologies to help you manage your overall Windows environment and Office environment. So a couple of things to note here is, first, number one, you may not have one of these licenses. So we get this all the time. If you bought your Office 365, or Microsoft 365 through GoDaddy or another third-party provider, you may not have all these features. So there's a lot of resellers out there like GoDaddy that give you a version of Microsoft that isn't the complete version. And it's a headache to try to manage, and you have to go through GoDaddy to fix things. We've actually helped a lot of clients in the past year move over from some of those, for lack of a better expression, dumbed down versions of Microsoft 365 that you can buy through a reseller, through your domain purchaser, right? Like GoDaddy, they resell Microsoft, but it's not actually the Microsoft you can get directly from Microsoft. It's another version of it. And there's just so much headaches. We've helped a bunch of people navigate that and move over from the GoDaddy version to the version that has the Microsoft, that has all the features and has all the capabilities and has everything you need to really get the best value out of it. And then also we help people figure out which licenses they need, right? So depending on your organization, they have different licenses. But the big takeaway here is, number one, you may not be purchasing it directly from Microsoft. So that's one thing to realize is, hey, if you come across issues, you might have to go through GoDaddy or your domain provider. That is a sticky point. We've had so many clients have a lot of issues with that, whether it's through email or file storage or integrations. So that's number one, figuring that out. And number two, figuring out what's the best licenses and navigating. And as the names change and as they move over in the next year or two over to the Microsoft 365 world. A couple other things here is, they're going to be repackaging their solutions. They're going to be adding more stuff. Not a whole lot here outside of the fact that the E3 license is moving over to the business license, and the price is the same. They're just going to be adding more features, right? And they're going to be adding more tools there. Awesome. So let's move into the kind of next area. And thanks for the questions. Looks like we're getting some great questions in the Q&A. Please continue to submit your questions in the Q&A, and we'll be sure to answer them at the end of the webinar. Awesome. So the power of SharePoint. So first, let's talk about the difference between SharePoint and OneDrive. And once again, Microsoft is awesome. You can do so much with it, but they're not always the most intuitive, and things kind of bleed over a little bit when it comes to SharePoint and OneDrive. So SharePoint really is a internal board, if you would, where you can have a calendar that has, upcoming company events. You can do internal surveys and voting. You can have critical websites and business processes and documentation and collaboration. It's really kind of an internal a board, if you would, where you can store documents. And how we use SharePoint is we use SharePoint for all our internal documentation and internal internal documentation and processes. So HR stuff or internal documents that are just internal, they're not external facing. You can use SharePoint for external file storage. It's not as seamless as OneDrive. So, SharePoint really is great for that internal stuff. SharePoint, you can also do all sorts of crazy custom programming and all sorts of internal processes. There's a lot you can do with it. This is what our one of our vendors is. As you can see here, this is kind of their version of it. And you can see they're doing things like, archived files and notes and brand assets and conference rooms and upcoming events and kind of an internal board. Teams has come out with a lot of tools that are kind of replacing some of this SharePoint. So SharePoint's still great for internal file storage and kind of internal processes and documentation. And then ultimately, it can still be used for a calendar, right? Upcoming events, especially if you're a larger organization that has like a lot of internal company events that you want to highlight. It's a great place for that. Kind of a good company board for internal communication. Let's move over to OneDrive. So OneDrive is really where, and they've actually changed OneDrive for Business is kind of the new term they're using for it. And OneDrive is really what we've seen the best way to share files internally and, mostly externally. So if you're trying to share files with clients or trying to collaborate, OneDrive is an awesome platform for this, and it integrates with Teams and it has a bunch of great capabilities there. So what you can do is really it's a vault, so you can store all your files, and you can share files externally with people and internally as well. You can have live, synchronous sharing where you could share it with somebody else, and then it can also you can see them make edits. You can work on the Word document, the Excel document, the PowerPoint document together. And like I mentioned, all of the business licenses in Microsoft 365 include a terabyte of free data. So once again, if you're storing files on your local server, your workstations, or backing them up to an external hard drive, you can put them in the cloud and save money there and utilize, especially if you're already paying for the Microsoft subscription. So a couple things to note. Probably one of the most powerful forms and reasons to use OneDrive is its advanced sharing capabilities. So let's take a couple minutes here to dive deep into this. Big picture. If there's there's really only one way to securely share files with people. And that is through an authenticated vault where somebody has to enter in a username and password to get into the vault. So, for example, if you've ever done online banking and a banker has sent you a document, I guarantee you had to log in with a username and password. Banks, if you ever want to look at the best practices for security, banks, they are, obviously securing one of our most important assets, which is money. And so they always have the best security in place, generally speaking. So if you are emailing, this is super important. If you're taking anything out of this webinar, this is probably one of the most important things you should take out of it, is that you should never email documents or send any sensitive information via email. So email, if you're sending documents or even text in the email, it is not secure. A little fun fact is that when you send an email, it doesn't just go directly to the other person's inbox. It actually goes around to a bunch of servers around the world. And if any one of those servers were to get compromised, that email could potentially be exposed. So, and some of you may be asking, well, what about encryption? Can you add encryption? Yes, you can add encryption onto your email, where when you send an email, it encrypts the email for the other receiver. However, that does not guarantee you your client or your vendor or the third party is not going to respond back to your email with a signed tax return or a bank statement or their credit card information or driver's license. It doesn't guarantee a two-way communication. So you really have to share documents in a super secure manner. Sending things via email is not secure. I repeat that. Sending things via email is not secure, even if you're using encryption, because it does not guarantee the person on the other end will respond in a secure manner. I guarantee you they don't have encryption enabled, because very few people have encryption enabled in their email. So even sending emails, even sending a link, right? So as you can see here is the sharing capabilities. There's a ton of different ways you can share a document in OneDrive. The first one is here is anyone with a link, right? That's not secure. If you were to send that via email and that email were to get opened, if it's just a link, a criminal can click on the link and then get into the email, get into the file and download the file. Here, this is actually I literally screenshotted our OneDrive. I can share it with people in Northwest Technologies. That is secure, because anyone in NW Technologies group will have to log in to access that link. You can do it with people with existing access or specific people. So specific people is the most secure way of doing this. So basically you click on that, you enter in their email address, it sends them an email where they have to then log in with their email account to then access the file or document. So what this does is and then what I do is I actually create a secure folder in OneDrive. So I create a folder and then I share it with a specific person via email, where it sends them an email where they have to log in with a Microsoft 365 login. So, and I'm sure you're asking this question, as you should be, because it's a great question to ask, is, well, do they have to have a login? And the question is, yes, they do have to have a Microsoft 365 login, but that's free. Just to get a Microsoft 365 login is free. They don't need any Microsoft subscription. So if they use Google or Microsoft, or if they use Google or some other email provider, they don't need to ultimately pay for anything. They just need to sign up. It's the same exact thing if you were to share something through Citrix ShareFile, or if you have a private file storage vault. They're going to need to sign up for some login. They're going to need to have some password. And the great thing about that is, you could have MFA enabled. Another secure way you could do it is setting up a password that you give to them over the phone, right? So you set up a password and ultimately you can set up a password, but you don't want to email them the password. You want to call them and give them the password over the phone. Because if you email the password, we're back to that same problem if that email gets exposed. So there's really two ways you can share things securely. You can set up and share it with a specific person and kind of big picture, when you're talking about workflow and workflow setup, the outcome of what you want, like I mentioned, is you want somebody to have to log into a secure portal to access the documents. Microsoft OneDrive does this. ShareFile does this as another file storage provider, where they have to log in and authenticate themselves, and hopefully have MFA set up, which is multi-factor authentication, which we'll talk about that later, which is a best practice. The other way you can do it is setting up a password, which passwords, it's not very user-friendly, right? Because then you have to call the person up. The best way is creating a secure vault where they have to log in and authenticate themselves. So don't mean to spend a ton of time on that, but it's actually super important. We have so many people that ultimately are not sharing files securely, and we have all sorts of files out there on the interweb, and who knows who has access to them. So best practice is to use a secure vault, or set up a password and then call them. Awesome. A little side note, if you want additional help with Microsoft 365, we're about to jump into Teams, but if you want additional help, we're a Microsoft partner, a reseller, head over to nwtx.com/Microsoft 365. I'll put the link in the chat. You can schedule a one-on-one with us right now, and we can talk you through how you're using Microsoft 365, how you could use it better, potentially save you money, make sure you're using the right subscriptions, help you with training, all sorts of fun stuff. But let's move into Teams. So Teams is the next section. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time on this. So buckle up, because we're going to do some best practices on Teams, how to use Teams well, and kind of what's new and up and coming in Teams. So first of all, this is Teams. What is Teams? Microsoft Teams is a team collaboration, pun intended, platform where, and this is kind of a newer technology. Slack was the first kind of provider of this, the first real contender of this platform, where it's a place for you to collaborate with with other team members. It's a place for you to hold meetings. And so kind of the best, where we see Teams really being strong, or these team collaborations like Slack or Teams being really strong, is when you want to, when you want to interact with somebody, but it's not a phone call. You don't want to be as disruptive as a phone call, right? Or a meeting. You want to set up a meeting, but you also don't want to text them, because texting, you can't track it. You don't have a record of it. You can't bring other people into it. It's usually on a personal device. So Teams came in where, hey, you want to instant message somebody, where you want to get their attention. It's time sensitive, but if they're in a meeting or if they're working on a project, it's not going to interrupt them, right? It's not an emergency where if it was a phone call or a meeting. And so it really came out of this need of like, hey, we want to have this collaboration, this instant collaboration, without having to text somebody, which is not super secure, or it's usually on a personal device, but you also don't want to disrupt them. And honestly, it's really pretty powerful in the sense of being able to, and Teams especially, Slack not so much, but Teams especially, I don't call my team members. I don't email them. Rarely do I email them. I don't text them. Everything goes through Teams. And it's great because I can bring people in on conversations. I can search conversations. I can see, I don't have email is kind of an abyss of information, and it's really hard to track things and hard to find things a lot of times. Whereas Teams is much easier to search and bring in other team members, host meetings as a great meeting capability. I'll just jump on this question now, because we get this question a lot, is why aren't we using Teams right now for this webinar? And Teams webinar feature is not quite as robust as Zoom. So we still use Zoom for webinars, but using Teams for holding meetings and kind of the virtual meeting presentation. So we get that question a lot as well. So it's really a kind of a central place for all of your communication. And a lot of questions we get is going back to these channels. So you can break it out into channels where you can have specific people where it's like, hey, only accounting has this channel. So everyone in accounting has, talks in this one channel, everyone in marketing. That way you can have specific teams within Teams, interesting terminology, kind of a tongue twister there, but teams within teams communicating. Some of the benefits, I'm going to briefly go through these, are 4 hours a week are saved by information workers through improved collaboration, information sharing. 150 trips were saved on average. 45 minutes a week are saved by first line workers collaborating with colleagues. Almost 18% improvement of time to decision made by decision makers. So Teams is so powerful. So we're a fully remote company. We've been fully remote for about 6 months now. We have kind of team members all across the country in different time zones. And what was so cool, I just want to hit on this point, was when we started hiring remotely, was we were able to hire people so fast. So we would have their first interview, let's say on a Thursday morning, and by Friday afternoon, they had a job offer because of Teams. We were able to record our meetings in Teams and then share them with other members of the team to be like, hey, what do you think about this new hire? And if they gave, thumbs up or thumbs down, we could have a second round of interviews. And just remote working is, you're able to, your time to decision making is so much faster. But with Teams really helped us accomplish that with recording meetings, with sharing meetings in Teams. So super cool. Like it was this, like my head was kind of spinning when I was like, wait a sec. Our first interview was with this employee yesterday, and now we're giving them a job offer today, because they were able to have 2 or 3 rounds of interviews. 10 people were able to watch the recording. We were able to get feedback on multiple candidates very quickly. Super cool outcome of remote working, but then also with Teams was able to help accelerate that. Obviously, even if you're not fully remote or if you're a hybrid company, you can still, benefit from utilizing Teams and having your meetings in there from the ability to be able to have those meetings quickly, have second round of interviews quickly, and then also ultimately record the meetings. 88% of survey respondents felt having all of our solutions in one place saves time. That's a no-brainer. Obviously, that's why a lot of you are on this webinar is, hey, we want everything in one place. We want to simplify our environment. Another great one, 19% reduction in meetings each week. With being able just to message people quickly, you're able to save a lot of time on meetings, right? You don't have to call them. You don't have to have another meeting. Meetings are great. Don't get me wrong. I love meetings. It's a great time to collaborate and have more intimate conversation and personal conversation. But ultimately, it can be a lot of waste of time, right? Especially if it's not efficient. Cool. Some of the features we really love is searching. So you can search in Teams really quickly and find. You can search under messages. You can search by people. You can search by files, right? Files that were shared in there. Another cool thing is tagging. You can tag, a specific team and be like, hey, everyone on the delivery team, you need to be aware of this. Or Jacqueline, or be sure to, you need to look at this message because this is relevant to you, right? And you can kind of pinpoint specific people or teams. You can look at recent chat views, right? You can see under the chat feature, you can see, what's most recent, right? What just came in. That way you can focus on kind of what's top priority. File storage. So you can integrate, and they're getting better and better at this, of integrating SharePoint and OneDrive into Teams. So you can have your files in there. You can open up a file in Teams. You can share a file directly with somebody and then open it and collaborate. Apps. They've only been adding more and more apps to Teams where you can integrate your other tools in your environment, whether it's other Microsoft products, right? Like Planner, or like their project feature, which is their project management tool, or Trello, which is another project management tool. You can integrate this in there. I'm going to hit on the phone system. So Microsoft Teams has a phone system that you can add. We are not recommending it to our clients because it is not ultimately a business class phone system. A lot of things like auto attendance and pretty extensive work chat flows and call queues and things like that, it doesn't have capabilities for that. However, there is providers that can integrate with Microsoft Teams. So RingCentral is one of those. We have a couple clients utilizing RingCentral, and we've helped them get RingCentral set up with Teams. And then we also have a phone system we help our clients work with that we can help them do. So there's, for phone systems, the Microsoft Teams phone system is really not up to snuff from our standpoint, and it isn't a business class phone system. RingCentral is a decent option, or just having a third-party phone system is also works great as well. So a couple other things here. These are things we would recommend enabling in your Teams environment to make sure. There's so many things you can enable on the admin side. So if you want help with this, once again, reach out to us, schedule a time with us. We can help you navigate this. But these are the things you should recommend, that we recommend that you enable in Teams. So direct messages, group chats, being able to rename chats, saving messages to Outlook, pinning chats. A couple other things you should do is team sites, channels, conversations and announcements, file sharing, documents, in-document collaboration. A couple other things here too that you should enable. These are all to help you get the full capabilities of Teams. Meet now, kind of the call feature. So this is not actually the Teams calling. This is more for calling internally. So this is also some of the team collaborations. So meet now, scheduling meetings, auto conferencing bridges, live events, which is kind of this webinar feature, team dial and voicemails. So a couple of the cool features I wanted to hit to as well. And thanks, we've got a lot of great questions coming in. I think we have like 15 questions we're going to answer here. Please send them in and we'll try to get to all of them before the end of the webinar. But a couple of things here kind of want to go through is, so first, this is the Teams meeting. So when you set up a meeting, this is what you'll see, right? So you're waiting for this person to join and you have this bar up here. And I kind of want to go through some cool features of this bar. So first, there is the raise hand. This is something you can do in Zoom as well. But you can raise your hand. This is awesome because, best practice is you should be muted in a meeting, right? And unless you're talking, and of course you have to unmute yourself, which is its own sometimes issue with people forgetting to unmute themselves. But raising your hand is a great way to, whoever is conducting the meeting, you can be like, okay, so-and-so wants to speak next. And that way you don't have to, jump in and be like, hey, I'd love to talk next, which multiple people talking over each other can be challenging. So raising your hand, even though if you're in person, you can probably just interrupt the person and get away with it. Whereas in a Teams meeting or a virtual meeting, it's really hard to interrupt people, as you probably experienced. So raising the hand is a really great feature. And next thing is there's 3 little dots here. I'm going to kind of go through some of those dots. So number 1 is the different types of meetings you can have. So you can have gallery view. You can have, let's see, I can't actually see the other ones. Looks like gallery view, together mode, and large gallery is the other one in the middle there. So the first one, this is together mode. So this with 50 people is a little overwhelming, but I love together mode. We have, a team of about 15 in our company, and it works really well for kind of that 15 to 30 people. Once you get into 50, I think it goes up to 49. Once you get into that max, it's kind of a little bit overwhelming. But what's really cool about this is it just takes their head and shoulders and eliminates their background. You can do blurred background, which is a cool feature that you can do in Teams as well when you're just doing regular gallery mode. But together mode's awesome. I love together mode because it takes away the distraction, takes out the dog in the background and, background of whatever it is in their background, and just puts them around a table. You can have this is a auditorium view or a lecture hall room. You can also have like a coffee table or a conference room table, and it basically puts their heads around the table. Kind of funny and bizarre in some ways that we're in this world, but this is kind of the first iteration of fully remote meetings and kind of getting everyone in one screen, right? And that way you can see everyone too, because, oh my gosh, trying to move around to different screens and making sure you're looking at different parts of the screen can be super fatiguing. But having everyone under one window is super great. This is the regular gallery view and kind of highlighting the speaker. This is highlighting, showing the presentation with the gallery view, where you can't really see everyone. You can just see a couple people, maybe the person talking. This is large gallery view, where you can see everyone. I think they're up to 49 people you can see at one time. This is a little overwhelming for me. I personally like this version or together mode the best. It's a little less overwhelming. You get the person that's talking or the presentation or the together mode. Awesome. Another cool feature here is meeting details. So if you click on that, it's actually going to pull up the meeting details where you can invite more people to it. So in Outlook and also in Teams, you can schedule a Teams meeting and then just invite somebody via email in that, like you would send a calendar invite, or you can copy the details here, put it in an email or text it to somebody, and you can have all those meeting details. Quick, cool feature for that. Okay, this is an awesome feature that's super helpful with virtual meetings, especially if you're working remotely or you're on the road or you're having internet connections, is turning off incoming video. So this is, I don't think any other platform has this from what I've seen, is you can turn off incoming video. So what that does is it turns off all the people's, everyone you're on a conference call's video, where you're not gonna see their video anymore. And you can also turn off your video, right? And so this is super helpful if you're having internet issues. So if you're sputtering or there's a delay and it's super annoying, just turn off your video, right? Turn off your camera, but then turn off this little button right here, which is turn off incoming video. Or if you're noticing somebody's having internet issues or it's sputtering or they're on the road, have them turn off their incoming video. Be like, hey, turn off your camera and also turn off your incoming video. This will eliminate that disruption and eliminate that issue, right, of having that video. And honestly, just this audio works way better over the internet, especially if you're having internet issues. That's an awesome feature. I love this feature. We use it, every once in a while, especially if you're having internet issues. So cool. Before we transition to the next section, once again, if you want help with Microsoft 365, go to nwtx.com/Microsoft 365, schedule a one-on-one with us. We can help you with that. Cool. Let's jump into some best practices around securing your Microsoft 365 environment. So number one is you should be using MFA. So let me backtrack here for just 1 second. Why should you secure your M365 environment? Well, ultimately, if all your stuff is there, you really want to have best practices in place to secure it. And then also, there's ultimately your files are there, your emails are there, all your information is there, and you want to make sure you have the best practices in place. And once again, nothing's 100%, right? People are targeting cloud storage now more than ever because everyone's going to the cloud. Cyber criminals are targeting cloud environments now more than ever. So number one, MFA. You should have MFA enabled across your entire Microsoft environment. So what we do is we have MFA enabled, which is multi-factor authentication. That's that annoying text messages, that's annoying text messages that you get from your bank or whatnot that you have to enter the 6-digit code. You can also have an authenticator app that has a new code that's created every 60 seconds or so. So what we do is we use and enforce MFA across our entire environment, and then we also have our passwords automatically. So we don't actually reset passwords anymore. A bunch of studies have come out. That's kind of a side note, is that resetting your password every 60 days doesn't really do anything. Mostly because you're usually resetting your password to something that's similar, or you write down your password. And really, the best things that they found is using MFA and then having to re-authenticate yourself every 30 to 60 days. So I believe for our company, every 30 days, we have to re-authenticate ourselves. So if I have email on my phone, I have to re-log in and do MFA. Once again, it's kind of annoying, but it's really the best practice where it logs you out, right? It logs you every 30 days. It logs you out of your calendar, of your email on your phone, of your email on your computer. That way you have to re-log in and make sure it's you that's on that computer, right? Or on that phone or on that calendar. And then MFA is kind of in conjunction with that. And then changing your password, we don't do that for our clients anymore. Lots of studies have come out that it really doesn't do anything to change your password. MFA and re-authenticating yourself every 30 to 60 days is a better platform for that. A little side note too, a password manager is super helpful for MFA and managing MFA. We have a webinar on our website for password managers. Password managers are the best thing that have come out in the past 10 years. Highly recommend one of them. 1Password's an awesome solution that we use internally and we help our clients set up as well. Only share secure files, right? Like we talked about. So only sharing files via a secure vault or a password that you share over the phone. Backup emails and file storage. So in Microsoft's terms and conditions, they actually recommend, highly recommend, in Google as well, that you back up your emails and file storage. You're probably asking yourself, why would I need to do that if they guarantee they won't lose my data? Well, they do guarantee they won't lose your data if it was their fault. But if you have an accidental deletion of an email or accidental deletion of a file, or basically negligent deletion, then they cannot guarantee that they will get your information back. So backing up your emails and your file storage is super important. And also, it's not putting all your eggs in one basket, right? You have a backup of the cloud. We used to back up our workstations and servers, right? And we still do if you have data on them. So why wouldn't you back up the cloud? Why put all your eggs in one basket and fully rely on Microsoft for your entire organization's infrastructure, right? Last but not least is monitor suspicious activity. So what we do for our clients and we do for internally, and a little story here is a couple months ago, we had a client, one of my engineers reached out to me and said, hey, I've noticed that somebody in Eastern Europe is trying to get into your email account. Do you know why that is? And I'm like, I have no idea why that is. So he was able to put in additional restrictions on my email account to make sure no one was able to get into it, and put in heightened for security for a while to make sure no one was able to get into it. So monitor for suspicious activity. There's extra tools you can do that, admin panel, stuff like that. Lots of cool things you can do there. Okay, so the future of Microsoft. I'm going to dive deep into this just for a second. It's all coming including in the Microsoft 365 universe. It's going to be including the Office 365, and it's going to have device management. It's going to come with Microsoft 10. It's going to be focused on security. It's going to be including these applications like we talked about. And then also the security, additional security, safe links, safe attachments, spoof intelligence, a bunch of stuff like that. That they're going to be including in that as well. So awesome. We got about 10 minutes left here in the presentation. And let me go through some of these questions here. Just a couple things here. Amy, you're super welcome. Glad this was helpful to you. And it looks like, Angelica, you see spam emails coming in looking like the recipient needs to add their credentials, but in reality, it's a hacker trying to gather their information. You see spam emails coming in looking like the recipients needs to add their credentials. Oh, yep. So yeah, that's a spoofing email. Microsoft 365 has some features in there where you can report spoofing and things like that. And ultimately, that can help with that. Anita asks, can you email them the link and then text them the password? Texting is secure depending on the texting. It's honestly not always secure. It's not always encrypted from endpoint to endpoint. Android to Android devices are, Apple to Apple devices are, but not always Apple to Android. It's also usually a personal device. So who knows who has access to that device, right? So the best practice is still to call them with the password. Yep, like Skype, Jody, great. The Teams is like Skype, where you can send them messages. Does Teams allow for document retention on everything that occurs in Teams? Great question. And I don't actually know the answer to that. I would reach out to us and we can have an engineer look at that. What happens in Teams is actually just a reflection of what happens in OneDrive and SharePoint. So yes, it would automatically update to OneDrive to see what happened in Teams, a month ago in a Word document. That would be probably have to look at, that would have to look at in actual the OneDrive setting. So yeah, and then ultimately, so I would look in the OneDrive. That would be the best practice for that. So great. And then does OOMA integrate? I'm not entirely sure, Angela. I would reach out to us and we can have one of our engineers look at that. Are we covering Outlook today? We covered a little bit of Outlook, but ultimately that was, we're not covering that. Sarah asks, I'm in the legal field and the majority of hearings are held via Zoom in my jurisdiction. Is it worth to utilize Teams within my organization if the majority of activities outside of the organization is by Zoom? Great question. So, like I mentioned, we still use Zoom in certain situations just because more people have access to it, or there's specific organizations that need it, webinars, things like that. So yes, it is still a great solution for internal communication, right? It still has all those chat features and collaboration, and it can do more than Zoom. So ultimately, yes, I would agree that even if you're just using Zoom for external, in jurisdictions, Teams still has a ton of features. Jurio asked, does it make sense to use Google Drive as a cloud storage and connect it to Microsoft Teams? It's a challenge to move the whole cloud, but Teams makes sense to our team. I would not recommend that. Google and Microsoft generally do not talk well together. So I would recommend moving your Google Drive over to OneDrive and actually double down on the OneDrive app. Trying to use both of them. We have clients that have done that or have been in that situation where they're, hey, I'm double dipping. And if you're in that situation, please move everything over to one or the other. If you either double down on Google or double down on Microsoft, don't try to use both of them. They don't talk well. You're going to have so many issues. They have different formats of documents, right? Like Google has its own format. Microsoft has its own format. It is a mess to try to use both of them. Angela said, and also enforcing MFA, yes, enabling it and enforcing it. Well said, Angela. Melissa said, is there a way we can share this information presentation once it's over? Yes, we'll have a recording of this presentation that we'll send out, and ultimately, we'll send it out. Angela says, does Northwest offer an audit of what we're currently doing as far as security within Microsoft 365, and what is the rate normally? We'll do an audit or an assessment for free of your Microsoft environment and also cybersecurity best practices. So please reach out to us and schedule a meeting one-on-one, and we can help you do that. Allison asks, does OneDrive allow for versioning of documents when collaborating so the docs are not lost accidentally? Great question, Allison. And yes, it does. You can have multiple versions of the document, or go back and restore to different versions, which is an awesome feature of the cloud. Synchronous sharing, and also the ability to have multiple versions. Anonymous asks, how is the search functionality in Google Drive, Microsoft Drive? Can you find documents based upon words in the documents, or does it search names only? Great question. And yes, it does search information within the document. It's once again not as good as Google. Google gets search, but the overall Microsoft ecosystem is superior to Google. Google search is better. Judy asks, is it possible to get a copy of these slides? Yes, we'll send it out afterwards. William, can you create data rooms for clients to upload files for a job? Yes, you can create specific folders that you can then share with your clients to upload documents in there securely. Get that two-way sharing, right? Where you have clients that upload documents and download documents back and forth. That's what's so crucial about and so awesome about the file storage in the cloud is you get that they can upload documents and then they can download documents in there securely. Anonymous asks, currently I have Microsoft 365 Family because it provides the apps for 5 people. Should I be shifting to business license? That's a great question. Reach out to us. I don't know your specific needs, and I don't know if that makes sense for you. Does OneDrive allow for versionings of documents when collaborating? Yep. We answered that. How does Teams compare to Zoom? Great question. Teams has a lot more features. Teams is like Zoom and Slack combined. So you have ultimately more features and more capabilities. We're about at the top of the hour. I'm going to go a little bit over since we have some great questions. I want to make sure we answer all of them. So we'll be answering these questions for a few more minutes to make sure we get all your questions answered. So ultimately, Teams is like Zoom and Slack came together. You have all the collaborations internally where you can send messages, you can have meetings, you can share documents, but then you can also host meetings externally, right? You can, like Zoom, where you can have a webinar, you can host a meeting, you can make phone calls, all that fun stuff. Yes, Whitney will send out the slides. William is backing up files and email on the cloud still. Yes, you should be backing up your files and emails on the cloud, like I mentioned earlier, for all those reasons I mentioned earlier. Melissa asks, is there a way we can share this presentation once it's over? Yes, we will share the recording and the presentation. Allison asks, how is the search functionality in Google Drive? I think we answered that question already. Melissa asks, does Teams differ from Slack? So yeah, Teams, like I mentioned, is like Slack and Zoom came together. Teams will ultimately do more than Slack and Zoom. It's like both of them combined. Sarah asked, does using Microsoft 365 on a Mac computer affect usability versus a PC? Great question, Sarah. I am a Mac user, and so is our CEO of our company. Most of our teams are PC users, but I'm a Mac user, and so is our CEO. I love Apple products, but I use Microsoft products. So I use all of the Microsoft applications on my computer, as well as Teams on my computer. And then I also use the web browser version of them as well. So, and they work great. Microsoft has done a great job of making their tools work well on Apple products. And also the iPhone as well. The Teams app works great. The Outlook app looks great. I've had no issues with those on our Macs and iPhones. Jody asks, we use a Box for file storage because we can restrict who can view and download the files. Can you allow view only in Microsoft 365? Yes, you can do view only. Microsoft 365 has as much, if not more, sharing capabilities than Box or Dropbox. It has all the same things. It has extensive file sharing and security pieces in place. So awesome. I think we got to all the questions. Once again, thanks everyone for joining our webinar. Super enjoyed being here and talking to everyone. If you want help with our solutions, please reach out to us, nwtx.com/Microsoft 365. We can help with training. We can help you purchase licenses. We can help you set everything up, transfer, move over from Google to Microsoft. We can help you do all the things and help you utilize Microsoft 365 better. We're a partner and reseller. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at hello@nwtx.com. We will be sending out a recording and the presentation of this webinar. So look out for that in the next day or two. Thanks everyone for joining. Super enjoyed to have everyone here, and I'm glad it was of value. Take care.